Welcome back to Inclusive Design 2024, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Barrier Break and Intopia, and our Gold supporters, InfoAxia and Tetralogical. You can follow us on Mastodon, and if you have questions for the presenters, post them using the ID24 hashtag, or you can use the YouTube chat. We'll gather your questions for our Q&A at the end of the session. Remember that ID24 is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. I am vaguely alarmed to be joined by my guest host, the talented, what's his name? Bruce Lawson. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Adrian. Hello, everybody. What a delight it is to be invited once again to guest host ID24. Thank you, Dave Lattori, for your work earlier. I noticed you had a great hat, so I should put my great hat on as well. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speakers, Kaye and Lizzie Hamblin, on how many senses do you think you have? Kaye and Lizzie, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Today we're going to talk about how many senses you think you have and how they play a role in design. So I'll start with some introduction. My name's Kaye and I'm MD of Drum Studios. It's an agency founded in 2006 with an emphasis on accessibility and sustainability. For those of you who need a visual description of myself, I'm a white female with a blonde asymmetrical haircut, currently wearing a black top, and my pronouns are she and her.
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I'm design lead at Drum. For those that need a visual description, I'm a white female in my late 30s with shoulder length brown hair. I'm wearing a beige Lucy and Yak hoodie and my pronouns are she and her.
So we're all aware of our main five senses. We've got sight, sound, touch, smell and taste. But in this talk, we explore whether there's actually so many more senses than just these five. And we'll look at the potential of sensory design and discuss ways designers can avoid triggering sensory overload for users. So sensory design hinges on the understanding that experiences are intrinsically multisensory. Each sense, be it sight, sound, touch, smell, or taste, offers a unique pathway to connect with the user. Sensory design in UI/UX is the careful art of balancing, designing specifically to engage a user's senses without overwhelming them. User experience is defined in ISO 9241-210, released in 2010, and according to this human-centered design standard, sensory design must be furthering human health and well-being. Should be used for increasing the productivity of users and the operational efficiency of organizations, being easier to understand and use, thus reducing training and support costs, increasing usability for people with a wider range of capabilities and thus increasing accessibility, improving user experience, reducing discomfort and stress, providing a competitive advantage, for example, by improving a brand's image, and contribute towards sustainability goals. So to summarize why you should be prioritizing sensory design, there are 5 clear reasons. It provides better user engagement, it triggers emotions, it builds brand recall, it differentiates you from your competition, and it helps you reach a wider audience.
So let's run through some of the ways the core senses can be used in digital, starting with engaging a user through touch. Haptic technology allows people to feel virtual objects through forces, vibrations, or movements. It can be used to create and control virtual objects in computer simulations and to improve the remote control of machines. Sufficiently accessible and usable haptic devices have sensors that detect the user's touch. Common examples are game controllers, joysticks, steering wheels, and smartphones. A great example of haptics is the Apple Watch fall detection feature. It detects a hard fall while you're wearing your watch. It will tap you on the wrist, sound an alarm, and display an alert. You can choose to contact the emergency services if needed, and if you don't move again, it will call them automatically. Importantly, the Apple Watch also allows the user flexibility to turn off haptics if that causes pain, or to make it more prominent if it needs turning up. Another wonderful example are exoskeletons, which have been designed to assist in restoring control over muscle groups for patients in rehabilitation. Sight is the most commonly used sense in digital. To engage the user's sense of sight, images and videos that are relevant to the website's content and purpose can be used, and your visuals may take a step away from the product itself. For example, a printer manufacturer may find it more effective to use a photo of people showing positive emotions rather than just a simple photo of a printer. So make sure the quality and resolution of imagery works across all screen sizes and is a minimum of 72 effective DPI. And of course, always include a good quality alternative text so a user can imagine what the image might look like when they can't see it. Sound can be an amazing way to enhance a user experience, but only when it's done in the right way. It can provide the user with confirmation of a task, help prevent and correct errors, and add to emotional engagement. And of course, provide a vital part of the experience for visually impaired users. Importantly, it needs to be designed in a way that users opt in and opt out of it to give people freedom of choice. Some things to consider when using sound in a digital experience are keeping it simple, so using short, unobtrusive sounds that clearly convey messages without distracting users. Being consistent, so sticking to a consistent set of sounds throughout your product to help users recognize actions or events. Consider the cultural aspect, so researching your audience to ensure your sounds are culturally appropriate and won't confuse or offend anyone. Giving control, so allowing users to adjust or mute the sound to suit their preferences, ensuring that it doesn't become a nuisance. Consider the environment. So if people use their devices in a loud environment, such as a construction site or a concert hall or a factory, then auditory inputs need to be designed in specific ways. And overall loudness, whether it's on speakers or headphones or on mobile. 1 in 23 people experience a persistent blending of perceptual pathways known as synesthesia. For example, colours are tasted, music is seen, smells are touched. And many synesthetes see numbers, words, and letters in colour, where everyone else might see them as black, for example. This unique perspective can be insightful when designing. Anis Jamani, the design director at Microsoft Design, wrote about her own lived experience. She says, "My team and I often laugh together when I tell them I can sense something isn't aligned. The palette feels off, there's sensory overload happening." On the opposite side, negative associations can form, such as your favourite song being used as your wake-up alarm. That can then trigger cortisol at a different time when you hear it on the radio.
An experience created through sensory appeal is more likely to be remembered, especially when users associate a positive emotion with said experience. This can lead to increased brand or product recall and recognition. But on the opposite side, get it wrong and a user will remember the bad sensory experience they had and avoid your brand for a long time. The future of sensory experience is exciting. You've got the use of augmented reality and virtual reality to create immersive experiences in the consumer space. It's getting more frequent. Digital assistants have matured, and today there is space to go even further with voice UI to interact with customers. As personalized and experiential marketing drives technical innovation, the services and integrations on the market are always improving. And whilst it's not yet possible to smell scents via your mobile devices, I've read that progress is indeed being made. But actually, there's more than just the 5 main senses. Digital design routinely ignores neurological factors beyond sight. Experts hypothesize that humans possess between 9 and 33 distinct senses. Unfortunately, most designers attempt to establish these ties through sight and sound alone, as if we're all eyes and ears. And that makes sense, right? The practical constraints of digital devices make vision and hearing the most obvious targets. But eco-psychologist Michael J. Cohen puts the number of senses at our disposal at 53. These are mainly broken down into 4 categories. The first of this is the radiation sense of colour, sense of moods associated with colour, and the sense of temperature. Here's how colour can trigger your senses. For example, red is a high energy colour that can trigger tension and anger associated with pain and can increase your heart rate, blood pressure, and appetite. Red is a high energy colour. I've already said that, sorry. But remember, 8% of men and 4.5% of the world's population will be excluded by using the wrong use of red. So use it with caution. Yellow can cause sensory overload and be really overstimulating due to its colour intensity. Also, yellow is primarily used to alert us. If we think about it, yellow is used on caution tapes, hazardous or toxic chemical signs, the keep out sign, the wet floor sign. They're all used to tell us to avoid a problem. And then pure white can increase anxiety levels due to the lack of comfort, negative association with hospitals and medical trauma. Then we have the feeling sense, the sensitivity to gravity, air and wind pressure and motion. For example, feeling the weight difference between a heavy book and a feather, suffering from ear barotrauma or aeroplane ear, from pressure changes when an aircraft is ascending or descending, the feeling of being pushed back in your chair when you're accelerating in a car. We've got the chemical sense, so hormone sense, hunger for food, water or air. Our interoceptive system is responsible for understanding and feeling what is going on inside our bodies. Sensations such as hunger, thirst, bathroom needs, heart rate, breathing rate, temperature and emotional regulation are all part of this system. So when we consider this in UI UX, colours can trigger temperature changes for users, just like walking into a room painted in warm colours or cool colours, or like viewing the Netflix burning log fire can make people feel warmer. Copywriting language choices can also trigger anxiety, leading to heart rate changes, and of course, the dreaded timed checkouts. Food takeout and delivery platforms are all very clever at triggering our hunger and thirst through language and imagery alone. The mental sense, so pain, both internal and external, mental or spiritual distress, sense of self, including friendship, companionship, and power. The sense of pain and physical pain caused by an injury or illness, and emotional pain, such as the sense of sadness or grief. The sense of fear, worry, and hopelessness that are generally associated with anxiety or depression, and the sense of bonds with people, of feeling supported, as well as the sense of power over yourself or others are just examples of this sense of self.
So why is there so much confusion as to how many senses we have? One reason is that there's a lot of crosstalk between sensory systems, making it a little tricky to figure out where one system ends and another begins. However, neurologists would count and agree on at least 9 senses. So on top of the main 5, there's also thermoception, which is the sense of heat. There is some debate that the sense of cold may be a separate sense. Nociception, which is the perception of pain. Equilibrioception, which is the perception of balance, and proprioception, which is the perception of body awareness. So if you try closing your eyes and touching your nose, did you get that first time? And that's proprioception in action. 33% of the population are likely to experience sensory sensitivity or overload. So by considering sensory issues in your accessibility scope, you can potentially help millions of people. While using senses to evoke the right human emotions remains the goal, triggering multiple senses in one go can overwhelm users, and that may result in sensory overload and a loss of customers. For example, 37% to 69% of autistic individuals are estimated to live with a sensitivity to loud sounds known as hyperacusis. Although there is less research on ADHD and sounds, initial studies show children with ADHD have higher rates of sound sensitivity than neurotypical children. Not all sensitivity is related to sound. Every person's brain is unique. Some people avoid websites with jarring colours, flashing lights, and moving parts, and some people are just more sensitive to their senses. Currently, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2, also known as WCAG, fails to cover the spectrum between minimum and maximum of sensory loading. For example, a minimum set of requirements could include an auditory sense alert or a haptic vibration. However, the same standards would also need to set maximum limits to avoid sensory overload. As part of standards, it's also key to allow opting in or opting out of minimum sensory alerts. For example, a haptic vibration may cause pain for a user with butterfly syndrome. For example, Kaye was having some vision problems and wanted to charge her phone. When she plugged it in, she could feel the haptic vibration, so she knew it was charging okay. However, if it had also made a sound alert as well, then it would have been too much for her. It would have triggered a feeling of panic.
So people with vestibular disorders can feel or be physically sick from viewing animated content on the web. I watched a talk by Peachy Neri at the UX Copenhagen 2023, and she noted around 35% of US adults over 40 have vestibular dysfunction, which affects your balance. That's roughly 69 million people, about the size of the population of Thailand. She also said on top of that, 4% of US adults, or around 8 million people, comparable to the population of London, suffer from chronic balance problems. And then additionally, 1.1% report chronic dizziness, and 80% of those 65 and older have experienced dizziness. But UI animation doesn't just impact people with vestibular on the web. It also impacts 2.2 billion people with vision disabilities, 75 million people on the autism spectrum, 50 million people with epilepsy, and 78 million people with dyslexia. The list could just keep going. So our digital devices are wonderful, annoying, and all sorts of in between. The lights, the motion, the print, the colours, and the noise can all challenge your already sensitive brain, eyes, and ears. When you're symptomatic, trying to scroll through an article on your phone or watch a movie on your tablet can be torture. Attending a Zoom meeting with multiple people talking and moving can be unbearable. And to be honest, even just texting back and forth can be dizzy.
So how do you make your website more sensory friendly in order to improve your marketing accessibility? Sensory friendly websites in particular are friendly for what you see and hear and how you navigate. Furthermore, sensory friendly websites make your information easy to understand. Here's a few things to consider that might help users with sensory processing or overload disorders. So what makes a sensory friendly interface? It should include allowing users to feel calm and reassured across all sensory layers, whether it's the copywriting, visuals, sounds, or vibrations. Have a clean layout with ample padding and breathing space to reduce visual distractions and cognitive load. Sound and motion are to be used sparingly and on an opt-in basis. Provide options for adjusting font size, line spacing, and color contrast to accommodate visual preferences and potential difficulties. And avoid flashing or rapidly changing visuals that can trigger sensory overload, epilepsy, vestibular and balance disorders, or just discomfort. So Kaye Neri also said in her UX Copenhagen presentation, when we build a website, an app, a digital product of any kind, they exist to be interacted with them. We need them to learn, to inform ourselves on something, to complete a task. The human-computer interaction is essential. But when we create a video or a film, a moving image as an art form that uses this technology, they exist to be passively received. No interaction is required. This is a really important distinction and choice to make. When animated content is put into a website and a user is passively forced to watch it without choosing to interact with it, it's not being used in the correct context. It would be much more suited to being in an explainer video. In UI animation, here are some things to consider. So minimize complex animations or transitions. Allow users the chance to opt out of motion content before they arrive at it. If you leave that until they do arrive at it, it's already too late. Provide options for customization, such as adjusting the animation speed or turning off certain interactive elements. Lazy loading is great for optimizing the page speed of large catalogs, but keep the animation really simple when loading tiles. Avoid loading animation loops when a user first arrives at a website, and don't load too many large assets at once. For example, if you're lazy loading tiles, you don't want loading animation on each tile, just one for the page would be enough. And only using motion to add communication and understanding of the copy, so don't use animation for animation's sake. So we're about to play a video of a website with auto-playing animation to show an example of what not to do. So this might be triggering for some viewers, so we'll give you a moment to look away if you need to, and I'm going to describe what's on the screen. So this example is a food mobile website with a heading text of your favourite, our treat, and there's an auto-playing animation of a bowl of food rotating in the centre, and the contents of the bowl are quickly changing between different types of dishes. It all looks delicious if animation doesn't affect you, but they have forgotten the users who need it to be static. And those users are likely to feel nauseous, and now the last thing they will want to do is order the food. So it's a perfect example of where a static image would have been enough, and unnecessary animation has a direct and negative effect on the company's business. Avoid moving text. So many sites nowadays have banners with text that they consider to be important messages, but it's lost if you can't read it at a glance. So please avoid the ticker shape trend. If it's really important, then it can be in a static announcement bar. For example, in this example, we see a still screenshot of a soap company with 2 ticker tapes, one at the top of the site and one above the header. And at a quick glance, all I can read about this is something on orders over £30, but I don't know what they're trying to tell me. And also World Land Trust, but again, I don't know what they're trying to say here and why it's important. Avoid parallax. Luckily, this trend is very much over, but occasionally some websites still include it. And this makes users with vestibular disorders dizzy and nauseous. We're about to play a video of a website with an auto-playing parallax animation this time. So again, we'll give you a moment to look away if you need to, and I'll describe what's on the screen. So in this mobile website for an energy company, it starts with the header of Tour Our Virtual Low Carbon Home. And as the user scrolls, a parallax style animation of the home begins attempting to show its energy devices, and the video will stick to the top of the screen. And the user scrolls, seeing more text that matches the video. Instead of making some users feel sick, this could easily have been done as a short explainer video that users could opt into and tap to play. Alongside, another option could be static images with good quality alt text and text paragraphs that explain everything step by step. So we cover a few different options to give the information instead of assuming everybody wants parallax here. Don't autoplay carousels. Consider, is the carousel really needed, as content will always be hidden off screen, and that can add extra confusion for people who rely on keyboard navigation. So if a carousel is really essential, then give the user control to move between slides at their own pace without the animation. So we're going to play a video of a website with auto-playing carousel this time. So again, we'll give you a moment to look away if you'd like to. So in this website for a sports brand, we see auto-playing carousel changing quickly between different imagery of people in sports clothing, but we learn very little here about the products as they're changing so quickly. This could easily have been done as one image with 3 models rather than 3 separate images. Don't autoplay videos or audio. So these can startle or overwhelm users with sensory sensitivities. Some users will leave a website immediately if a video or animation is playing in the hero area at the top of the page. Watching videos on a screen can be challenging, and partly to blame is what's called the parallax effect. So it's a feature that makes images seem realistic by having the background move more slowly than the foreground, and the motion difference can be very unsettling for people with balance disorders. So don't autoplay anything and allow people to turn the motion off and reduce that effect. And also video and animation shouldn't always be full width. Try to keep these under 1/3 of the user's viewport. Symptoms can range from migraines, imbalance, dizziness, vertigo, and nausea. So we need to make sure our online presence isn't making people sick for days. So the last video now, we're going to play a video of a website which has an auto-playing video in the hero. So again, we'll give you a moment to look away if you need to. So here we've got an example of the hero area for a service station company. The user's immediately presented with autoplaying video showing different service stations and office buildings, and it's a huge assumption that this is the most important thing for a person to see when they arrive at the website, and it shows little care for users with sensory sensitivity. Could easily have been a play button for people to opt in.
Another thing to consider is closed captions. Provide closed captions and transcripts for multimedia content to support individuals with auditory processing difficulties. But even captions, which is an accessibility tool, can cause sensory overload. Captions need to be written in a simple sans serif typeface and either in off-white text on an off-black background or vice versa. Don't get creative and style captions with bright colours written in display typefaces with kinetic animations. So many people also forget to include a background to their subtitles, so when the picture changes, the low contrast copy just gets completely lost. This is something that happens too often. Make sure your foreground audio is clearly distinguishable from your background audio. So don't use music that is distracting or includes lyrics when paired with a voiceover. Consider also how people might listen. They might listen with headphones, speakers, earpods. They might be on the move, working out. They may be commuting. So take notice of how many sounds you're presenting at once. Sometimes, without even realizing it, we are asking our brains to listen to people talking and music all at once. So make sure your videos are captioned so people have the option to switch the sound off. Since those with ADHD and autism often feel overwhelmed by too much voice, visual and audio noise, as we mentioned earlier, this also can be applied to your UI. Look for ways to reduce the extra clutter on the page. Anything that doesn't move the user towards a singular goal should be moved elsewhere or deleted. If a post has too many elements on it, consider splitting it into multiple pages to make the UX more relaxed. The activity we do most on our devices is reading. We read the news, books, emails, texts. It's continuous. So the brightness setting can help a great deal when looking at a screen, but there are other ways to ease the impact on our eyes and brain. So first, allow users to increase the font size. It often helps to enlarge the font, though this can also result in additional scrolling. Also, when choosing fonts, opt for a sans serif one like Arial. This won't tire your eyes out anywhere near as much as a serif font such as Times New Roman. Stick with black print on an off-white background, allowing the text to pop in relation to the background. And when adjusting font size, remember the screen size is important. Obviously, the larger the font size on a smaller the screen, the more eye movements you'll have to make. And this can also be particularly fatiguing to someone with vestibular disorders, as the tracking of the eyes can cause dizziness. So dizziness, including vertigo, affects 15 to 20% of adults yearly in large population-based studies. Vestibular vertigo accounts for about a quarter of dizziness complaints and has a 12-month prevalence of 5% and an annual incidence of 1.4%. Its prevalence rises with age, and it's about 2 or 3 times higher in women than it is in men. A third of these problems are caused by the dysfunction of the vestibular system. So with language, make sure you keep it simple and avoid using slang or too many acronyms and jargon. Let users skim content without having cognitive overload. Another important aspect of making your website more sensory friendly is focusing on the content of your web page. It is crucial to use simple language in your copy and design. Remember, people have different levels of literacy, and the average reading age in the UK is 9. Many people read websites in their second or third languages and may not be so fluent. And finally, you're absorbing so much information each day. Reducing the cognitive load of what you read and hear helps you to understand it. Use simple, less complex words and phrases. And keep copy blocks short and concise, and let users manually make font size adjustments that work for them. Definitely don't use a third-party overlay that just allows for simply big or small copy.
Colour is such a big topic in sensory design. When using text, ideally use dark text against light backgrounds or vice versa to ensure sufficient contrast. 451 for AA and 71 for AAA. But also bear in mind red, green and blue, yellow colour blindness. Excuse me. Combinations that can also pose problems are the use of green with blue, grey, black and brown, the use of blue with purple or grey, and the use of green and yellow. Block coloured backgrounds are also favoured, as gradient colours can cause problems as well. Bright colours that don't go together can quickly overwhelm a sensitive audience and induce sensory overload. Luckily, this issue is fairly easy to prevent. When you're choosing colours within presentations, choose calm, neutral or muted colours that will soothe participants. Work with pastels, earth tones and cool colours to minimise sensory issues. WCAG mentions minimum contrast, but it doesn't include a maximum, which is something that needs to change, as it can be overstimulating if the contrast is boosted too high. This maximum contrast of pure black and pure white is overstimulating for many users, as it's too intense. The solution is to aim for colour combinations with a contrast ratio in the mid-range that pass the minimum thresholds but aren't too overstimulating. Many colour combinations that pass the minimum WCAG contrast thresholds can still cause problems. Intense colours such as red, yellow or orange may be too bright for sensitive individuals. They can be desaturated though to reduce the vibrancy. Here we have an example of two pinks that are both AAA. However, the top example, which was supplied by our client, this was triggering symptoms for our user tester. In the bottom example, we reduced the saturation and made some small adjustments, and the colour was much more comfortable for them.
The brightness of your screen can be a particular problem too. Our modern devices have settings, obviously, that can easily adjust to reduce your brightness. And it's recommended that you set the brightness to closely match the room around you. So this will reduce eye strain as you look from the screen to your surroundings. But remember, this means that colours need to have enough contrast to accommodate these device changes. Users also may prefer to view websites in dark mode, which reduces the amount of light coming from the device. This means your UI must accommodate dark mode if selected by the user's operating system, but don't make it the only option, as it's not better for everyone. Remember, colours can impact our mood positively and negatively. The intensity of a hue can have as much of an impact as the colour itself, and not all colours are beneficial. So various studies estimate 15 to 20% of the global population as having some form of diversity. And studies have shown that 85% of neurodivergent individuals see colour more intensely. This statistic highlights the importance of user testing colour combinations whenever possible. A designer who isn't neurodivergent will perceive colour combinations in a calmer way than a large portion of the end users that they are actually designing for. If you need your visitors to focus on one task, take away the distractions and visual clutter, and give your customers with sensory processing disorders a comfortable experience so they can hear themselves think. So the live chat popping up as I'm filling in your contact form, the animation loop that sits above your body copy, I cannot mute or ignore these distractions, meaning I miss out your communication or I get anxious trying to complete your form. Be cautious of having background images with overlaid text. If you would like to do this, consider darkening the background image right down or use a colour block behind your text.
Earlier this year, we conducted a survey looking into how neurodivergent people face constant barriers within websites, and we analysed how customer behaviour for those individuals might respond, feel and interact differently with the accessibility. We asked, how would you rate your overall experience with retail websites in terms of accessibility? And only 14% said very good and only 1% said excellent. We asked, have you encountered difficulties accessing or navigating retail websites due to neurodiversity related challenges such as sensory overload, difficulty processing information, text size, and 89% of the participants said they had. When asked what were the specific challenges they faced, 58% of participants had executive functioning difficulties, 68% of participants had cognitive overload, 69% of participants had sensory overload, and 70% said they had difficulty processing information. We asked them to describe any specific challenges they have faced while using retail websites. One participant said, just providing simple options to enlarge text or changing colours would really make an impact. Another said the option when you sign in to disable flashing ads and pop-ups, and an option to mute the vibrancy of glaring, colourful sites. It's worth considering that the Clickaway Pound Report 2019 found that with the percentage of people with access needs who will click away from an inaccessible site remaining at almost 70%, the Clickaway Pound has risen to £17.1 billion in the UK, and that was 5 years ago now.
Going back to the other senses outside of the top 5, I want to just come back to equilibrioception briefly, the perception of balance. Balance perception, more than a unique sense in itself, is a set of sensory systems that work together. So you've got the vestibular system, the visual system, and the sense of proprioception, so vision and inner ear. So I had a stroke and brain tumor in my brainstem, and then subsequent surgery that affected my vestibular system. Living with a vestibular disorder can be truly debilitating to many people, yet UI design choices can really trigger vestibular symptoms without you even realizing. What you might see as engaging, immersive, or creative can actually be vomit-inducing. So vestibular doesn't just cause dizziness from the auto-playing carousels, for example. I'm also now incredibly sensitive to light because of my vestibular damage. So it's glorious when the sun is shining, when it rapidly flickers through the trees. The flashes bother me, or if I'm sat in the sun, it doesn't take long before I start struggling in the bright sunlight. I find the same with colours on the web are also the same when it's too bright. Like me, you can be disturbed by light exposure without developing seizures, but experience other symptoms such as headache, nausea, or dizziness. But I do not have epilepsy. People incorrectly assume that there is only one type of photosensitivity. I also have visual issues now called photophobia is one of them. So the literal definition of photophobia is a fear of light. However, in medicine, it refers to your eye sensitivity to light, especially bright light, which can cause discomfort and pain. So light sensitivity can be associated with several types of medical conditions, which include eye strain, intolerance of light, and excessive blinking. A lot of people with similar issues to myself from my brain injury can find the blue light from a computer screen particularly problematic. Users quite often adjust the settings of their computer monitors and smartphones to avoid the most severe effects. So we must avoid using large areas of contrasting colours such as red and blue or black and white, because that creates a flickering effect, and instead choose softer or muted colours that create a smooth transition. High contrasting visual patterns such as stripes or checkered backgrounds are also another culprit. And finally, video and animation. Whilst broadcast video must be checked that they conform and they aren't triggering, the same can't be said for corporate videos, motion graphics, or even UI animation. Any video production or motion graphics studio must put the same attention to their video online as if it was to be broadcast. Finishing off with some statistics, around 10 million people aged 15 to 69 in the UK suffer from migraines. The number of admissions to hospital in England for headaches and migraines has increased 14% over the last 5 years, and NHS data shows that from 95,000 emergency admissions in 2014, it's now 109,000 emergency admissions. So at the same time, around 2.5 million primary care appointments are linked to headaches and migraines, and around 100,000 of which are referred to hospital for further treatment. In total, it's estimated the NHS spends around £150 million per year treating migraines and £250 million on care for headache sufferers. The cost to the wider economy is even higher, with 4.4 billion a year lost to 3 million migraine-related sick days. So we need to ask ourselves, are UI design choices and looking at digital devices all day playing its part in this massive increase.
Sensory-friendly design is essential because it acknowledges that people experience the world beyond the usual 5 senses, and many individuals are sensitive to things like motion, vibration, or light patterns. By designing with all the senses in mind, we create more inclusive digital spaces that can prevent discomfort and ensure everyone can engage comfortably. The solution of not knowing what to do with your design is to use a test and run A/B tests. In Germany, user testing is now mandatory in their BFIT-Bund version of the European Accessibility Act. This is a real win for sensory-friendly design, as it shows the understanding that WCAG 2.2 is a bare minimum and starting point, and that ultimately user testing will decide if a website is accessible or not. And it's important to test across different sensory profiles with users, as sensory design has such a wide spectrum. So for example, to test a sound, you could recruit a person hypersensitive to sound, especially low frequency, a person with lower spectrum of hearing that needs a hearing aid, a person on the autistic spectrum who finds loud and high frequency sounds overloading. Or to test the colour and visuals, you could recruit a person with red, blind and green weak, a person with contrast problems and farsighted, and of course, a variety of genders and ages.
So before you put pixel to screen, take a step back and think about your design. Think about how you can utilize sensory design without being overstimulated. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Kaye and Lizzie. That was great. And based on the comments I'm seeing, other people think so as well. Bruce, have we got questions?
We have a few questions and lots of comments, which I'm going to pass to Kaye and Lizzie because they're all complimentary. And,
That's good.
and you folks deserve to hear some nice comments immediately after you've been through the ringer of presenting to billions of people live. I just want to say, actually, from a personal note, that was amazing. And something you said just really struck a chord with me because I love sunny days. I love the sunshine. But I noticed a few years ago that I would drive to work, and in the wintertime when the sun's low, and I'd be driving past some coppices of trees all in a row, and the relentless regular flashing that it would put into my eyes, sometimes it made me feel like I was, I don't know, gonna swerve off the road or barf or something. And I didn't think anything of that until you mentioned it, and it gave me a flashback from years ago. So if I barf when I'm
Unfortunately, it wasn't the best flashback to get.
it wasn't. So if I vomit while I ask you the questions, it's your fault. Okay.
Okay.
So you mentioned user testing, and obviously we all need to test the real users, but there's also a need for budgetary reasons, logistics, etc., to be able to do some sort of smoke testing ourselves on our machines. Are there any testing mechanisms that you can recommend, not instead of user testing, but before the big user testing, perhaps, like plugins or?
Well, I don't necessarily think a plugin, but I think a lot of people with sensory overload or processing difficulties may well have things set up on their operating system. Like I mentioned, check it in dark mode. Check what happens when you turn the motion off, which again you can do in the operating system. I mentioned like the blue light and the brightness. Try changing your brightness down on your screen and then look back at your UI. Does it still meet the contrast threshold? So I would say, rather than necessarily a kind of a simulation, what I would do is personally go through all those accessibility things built into your operating system that are likely to be used, such as motion, brightness, font size, dark mode, just to check that you still have the same visual impact that you're after. And also, I know you're trying to look for ways to not use a test, although that's obviously the absolute goal. But I think a lot of when you're working in a company or an agency, you do have the luxury of giving someone a static version and asking them what they took from that, and seeing if actually, like we mentioned, do you need to add any extra animation? Does it need to pop, or actually to someone who hasn't been involved in that particular design, what it means to them? Because I think too much it's done on assumption that UI animation is engaging.
Interesting. I was thinking about the colors, the stuff you mentioned about colors producing sensitivities or sensations. Or you mentioned white, for example, can give people make people think about hospitals and might be negative. I remember actually years ago I was doing something and I thought, well, red's a lucky color in a lot of Chinese cultures. And so I was writing somebody's name in red, completely not realizing that in a lot of Asian cultures, to write somebody's name specifically in red is to wish them dead. And I had no idea about that. There's a lot of cultural context around color, I think. Can you speak to that for a minute, or is that an ambush?
I don't know. Have you got any comments?
Yeah, I think obviously we have encountered that in some of our work before, like probably before we moved into accessibility, with simple things like using green to mean something positive with a thumb icon, and using red and a down thumb icon to mean negative. And then when that went off, we then realized, okay, in China, the people using it were receiving that message completely differently. It was confusing.
So it was a big platform, and it was put out to about 15 countries, and like Lizzie just mentioned, one of them was China. And we noticed that every time someone from China completed the course, they were getting so many questions wrong compared to everyone else. And it was that exact thing that you said just there, where they saw red as, yes, that's positive, that's the right answer, that's positive, when actually it you know, naively, it was put as the incorrect. So I think it's a case of really not making any assumptions on that front. But, you know, red does have, it can be really positive, but it can also be really negative. So I think red's a colour to very much be careful with, I think. And like I said, it's the same with yellow. I know that ID 24 is yellow and black, but to me, that's a hazardous sign. Because I see yellow and black as that, you know, the toxic waste, hazardous waste signs, or the, you know, the police things, or the, like I said, it's just it's I suppose how you associate a color from either a positive or a negative experience.
Yellow and black says nasty wasps to me because I was stung by a wasp when I was a kid.
Yeah, that's true.
Never quite forgiven wasps, I have to say. We're going to run out of time, and I want to let you know some of the lovely things that people have said. So for YouTube, thank you for this. I have a lot of trouble with proprioceptive dysfunction with VR and AR. It makes me motion sick for days. Pichia Neri said, I'm so honored to be quoted, but above all, as someone suffering from animations et similia, I'm incredibly grateful for all the detailed information. This is a must watch for designers. Ollie said, thank you. As someone with epilepsy, invasive animation can cause massive damage without any thought. It also makes me switch off the brand completely. Julianne said, this is an amazing presentation. Thank you, highlighting so much of my lived experience. And a compliment and a question from Julia. Amazing presentation. Is it possible to get the slides?
Absolutely. We can share them with yourselves, and you can pop them on the, will you distribute the slides if we share them with you?
I suspect Adrian will have to answer that because he's
yes. If you have a URL for the slides, we are happy to share it on our Mastodon account.
Perfect. I'll
Probably
get them
else.
across. So yeah, I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. It's a sense that people just don't, like I said, routinely, you just as a digital designer think sight, and every now and again, you know, sound or touch, but very rarely do we consider our actual what's more of the neurological senses. So
Excellent. Well, Kaye, Lizzie, thank you very much. That was great. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to our viewers, if you liked this session, smash that YouTube like button. And don't forget that you can subscribe to our channel to be kept in the loop for future events. Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks to our supporters: Barrier Break, Intopia, InfoAxia, Tetralogical, Intuit, Adrian Roselli LLC,
Ooh.
Assistive Labs, the Law Office of Laney Feingold, Skyscanner, and Vispero. Inclusive Design 24 will be back on the hour with our next session. We hope to see you then.